She was there with the marriage.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to the 35th LeaderInsight program of KMA for this year. Let us all start with the KMA prayer that will be recited by our MC member, Mrs. Meena Thomas.
Let's pray. Lord, we come together today with open hearts and minds. May we find clarity in our discussions and strength in our unity. Let us inspire one another and foster a spirit of collaboration and respect. May our actions reflect our dedication to excellence and a commitment to uplifting our community. As we work together, may we encourage creativity and innovation, embracing the potential within each of us. God, we thank you for this opportunity to connect with each other and help us grow together.
Thank you, Meena. Friends, as we all know, we have a very, very eminent personality with us today. None other than Dr. Soumya Swaminathan herself, who is going to address us today. And I would request our Vice President and Program Committee Chair, Mr. Aljaz Khalid, to introduce her, please.
Chief guest of the day, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, President Vibhu Punaran, Honorary Secretary Dr. Anil Joseph, past presidents, a galaxy of them I can see, Managing Committee members, KMA members and student chapter members, ladies and gentlemen, good evening to everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome each one of you to the 35th program of this KMA year. Today, we are delighted to have a packed hall to listen to our world-renowned and highly respected chief guest. Let me at the very outset place on record a deep sense of gratitude to Dr. Soumya Swaminathan for accepting our invitation to address KMA members. We are all delighted and thrilled to have your address, listen to your address today for this 18th LeaderInsight session of KMA. On behalf of President Vibhu Punaran and the entire Managing Committee, I would like to welcome you, Madam, to one of the oldest management association in the country and the founding member of All India Management Association. I am grateful to all of you for coming and attending these sessions in large numbers, week after week. It is indeed a great motivation for all of us in the Managing Committee. A special welcome to all the Managing Committee past presidents and the Managing Committee members, KMA members and student chapter members. Our chief guest is a world-renowned personality and hence doesn't need any introduction. However, as per protocol and a tradition, I consider it as a privilege, proud privilege, to introduce her to the audience. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, a pediatrician and global expert in tuberculosis and HIV research, recently served as a WHO's chief scientist and previously from 2015 to 2017 as Director General of Indian Council of Medical Research, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. She assumed the role at the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation in February 2023. She is also the principal advisor to the National Tuberculosis Elimination Program of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Government of India. With over 40 years of experience in clinical care and research, Dr. Swaminathan has dedicated her career to translating research into impactful health programs. As Secretary to the Government of India for Health Research, her efforts were focused on integrating science into health policy making, enhancing research capabilities in Indian medical institutions, and fostering global partnerships in health sciences. Dr. Swaminathan received her academic training in India, the UK, and the USA, and has authored over 480 peer review publications and book chapters. She is a fellow of the US National Academy of Medicine, the Academy of Medical Sciences UK, and all major science academies in India. She holds honorary doctorate from the prestigious institutions like Karolinska Institute, EPFL Lausanne, and McGill University London. She currently co-chairs a global commission, Our Common Air, and serves on the Kofi Annan Commission on Food Security. She holds professorships at Karolinska University, Sweden, and Tufts University, USA. Currently, Dr. Swaminathan serves on the board of Alliance Biodiversity Population Foundation of India, Institute of Global Environment Strategies, and Women Lift Health, among others. She is a member of the Governing Council of the Tamil Nadu Climate Change Mission, member of one of Health and Climate Change Strategy Committees of Government of Tamil Nadu, and chairs the Scientific Advisory Board of Indian Council of Medical Research. During her tenure as WHO's first chief scientist, Dr. Swaminathan established the science division focusing on research, quality assurance of norms and standards, and digital health. She played a pivotal role in coordinating global scientific efforts and was instrumental in setting up COVAX to ensure equitable vaccine distribution to low and middle income countries during the COVID-19 pandemic. Her current focus is on addressing the health impact of climate change, especially on women and children, and food system transformation to strengthen nutrition security in India and regionally. I will be failing in my duty if I don't mention and thank my good friend Babu and Lata Parameswaran for being instrumental in connecting me to Dr. Soumya and requesting her to accept our invitation to address KMA members. Incidentally, Babu is Dr. Soumya's cousin, and for the icing on the cake, it is his birthday today. That's why he is not here, but we will be going from here for his birthday party. We are all eagerly looking forward to hearing Madam on science, sustainable development, and community empowerment. After the talk, there will be a case presentation on eco-restoration and eco-skilling of tribal youth in Wayanad district, followed by Q&A. So once again, a warm welcome to all of you, and wishing a great evening of insight on science and sustainable development and community empowerment from the world-renowned Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. Over to President Bibu Punaran for his presidential address.
Most respected Chief Guest of the day, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Vice President Mr. Ajaz Khalid, Honorary Secretary Dr. Anil Joseph, past presidents including our ICMR past President Mr. T.T. Thomas, Managing Committee members, dear KMA members, dear student members, and all gathered here. Definitely we are gathered here today because we're just going to listen to a very great personality, highly respected person, not only at the national level but also at the international level when it comes to health, healthcare, sustainability, and so many factors. There are so many things that come to my mind when it comes to sustainability and all that. But before I get into that, I think I should not be, Madam should be speaking more on such kind of things. First of all, I'd like to tell all of you that, the prayer that we read out today was first of its kind, and this is a specially curated prayer for KMA today, and this is what we're going to follow from now on. There is not going to be anything called a silent prayer, okay? So thanks to our Executive Director Jojo Jacob for having made that prayer for all of us, and that will be the first thing that's going to happen in every KMA meeting from now on. Next, let me thank, I'm sure that at least 75% of the people sitting here have just attended KMAC, our 42nd annual convention, KMAC 42, which was the second international convention of KMA. And let me, in all its grandeur, in all its style, with all those wonderful speakers that we had for the 2 days, let me just take this opportunity to thank everyone who worked for it, especially my co-managing committee members. But a person who really requires special mention is the convention chair and our senior vice president, Mr. Ali Kumar. Thank you very much. Convention of that glamour and that size would not have been a reality had it not been for the entire cooperation of all our members. So let me thank all of you for having been part of the convention. Now, when it comes to sustainability, our topic for today is science, sustainable development and community empowerment. When it comes to sustainability, I think Kerala ranks #1 in terms of sustainable development goals, or SDG as they call it, the SDG index. But then there is something called an oxymoron, I would say. This is published by Niti Aayog, and we are sharing that #1 slot with Uttarakhand. Madam being a medical doctor, I would like to say that, if we, and in fact Kerala is also ranked about as the first among the Indian states for the PQLI, or the per capita quality of life index. That being that, the doctor to patient ratio in our state, does anyone think that this is the best in the country? Well, we are not. That's why I said, there are certain, perplexing data that come out all the time when it comes to our state and many of these so-called sustainable development indices. Actually, the south of India is supposed to be good in healthcare, but among all the south states, we rank the lowest when it comes to doctor to patient ratio. Those are all very, very nominal margins, but that is the reality of the situation. So there is a long way for us to go in terms of all this. And when it comes to sustainable development, on the one side we need roads, we need bridges, we need so much of development. And at the same time, there are all these environmentalists people fighting for, no quarries to be broken, everything has to be intact, and none of the, our mountains cannot, our ecosystems should not be disturbed. All those kinds of, that is on one side. On the other side, we need development. On one side, we have a very, very green state which we have to protect. We can breathe, unlike other cities in India. Maybe if we compare ourselves with Delhi or so, we can at least breathe normally. Even we call ourselves Cochin city as an example. We call it, we always complain about our traffic, and everything. But then still, we breathe freely, we walk around freely. We are okay when it comes to the city, or when it comes to a state, if we take it like that. But my take on this, madam, I feel that you're a medical doctor, so I said medical is very important, or medical healthcare is important for everyone. I was just telling her that just like she was a proponent for when she was in the forefront when it came to COVID. me being in the medical diagnostic industry, we were one of the first people in the state of Kerala to have got a license from, she was part of ICMR, and we were one of the first people to get the ICMR licenses for doing the COVID testing, and that's history right now. Now, we are in the age of digitization, and our spend on the government salaries is almost, or more than 50, salaries and pensions together is more than 50% of the total budget and revenue of the state. So where do we get the money for development or sustainable development, for making ourselves eco-friendly, whatever? These are kind of facts that stare at us, but then perhaps, this is just my thought, perhaps with the age of digitization taking place rapidly, let us hope that the number of employees per government office will come down, and that will reduce the stress on the government for salaries, and that perhaps will give us more money for spending on public expenditure like healthcare, other development agencies. So with these thoughts, I think I should stop here and would request Madam to take over and give her thoughts on her favorite subject of healthcare as well as science and sustainable development. Thank you once again, Madam, for accepting our invitation to come over here to KMA, because it is not every day that we can get a Dr. Soumya Swaminathan to address us. So we are indeed really grateful for you for having accepted our invitation. Thank you, and let's listen to her.
Very good evening to all of you, and firstly I want to thank you both particularly for inviting me to be here with you, and you had coordinated everything with Mr. Babu Parmeshwaran, so that was very good. And I'm also happy that I could use this opportunity to come and meet many of the leaders here in business and in Kerala that your association brings together. And I want to thank you also for the remarks just now that you gave a very good, I think, overview and introduction to really the key issues and challenges that face not just Kerala but India and world today. So maybe we can start with COVID, and before I get into my presentation, and as Mr. Khalid Algier said, I will talk about MSSRF and the work that we are doing, particularly with a focus on the work in Wayanad, since we are in Kerala now, and then also about a little bit about climate change and health. Of course, there's huge number of topics that one could talk about, but perhaps it may be relevant to start with COVID and also the news that Mr. Trump is withdrawing from the World Health Organization, and what implication is that going to have. See, today we live in a very interconnected world, and the threats that face humanity today, they are all threats that have to be addressed at a global level. There is hardly anything which one country can do on its own and say that we have been successful. So let's start with pandemics, viral outbreaks. We know that because of many factors, including rapid urbanization, deforestation, a lot of still illegal trade in wildlife. Southeast Asian countries, they trade in live animals, so they bring them and keep them in one place. This becomes an ideal opportunity for viruses to jump from one species to another. And also the fact that human beings, are encroaching into forest spaces, and there is climate change, and insects and other species which only used to survive in some areas can now survive, in other latitudes. So you see diseases like dengue spreading into Europe because those mosquitoes could never survive the temperature. Now your southern Europe is warming. So you have dengue mosquitoes, malaria you can see in the mountains now that you never used to see. So many other infectious diseases, are changing their behavioral patterns. So the first threat is a viral, or most commonly a viral zoonotic infection that jumps into humans, as what happened during SARS-CoV-2. We still don't know the origin of the virus, in the sense that there are hypotheses. And the most likely hypothesis, scientists believe, is that it jumped from the bats. Bats have thousands of coronaviruses actually, which do not do any harm to them. So from the bat to an intermediate animal, we don't know what it is. In the case of SARS-1, it was a civet cat. In the case of MERS, which is another coronavirus, it's the dromedary camel in the Middle East. In the case of SARS-CoV-2, we still not found out through what animal. Unlikely it came directly from a bat to the humans, but that piece of research could not be done because China was not really very open in sharing of data or allowing scientists to come and investigate the origins of the virus. So it's unfortunate because it's important to know so that you can take preventive action the next time. But it's very likely that in the US today you have this H5N1 influenza strain that is spreading among cattle farms, and that means it has already jumped. It's a type of avian influenza, so it generally occurs in birds. It has now infected mammals like cows, and as you know, they have cattle farms, crowded together, many cattle, and that's the way they do the farming over there. And you are getting sporadic human infections from H5N1, which has a very high mortality rate actually, much more than H1N1. So it's a matter of time before the virus, because viruses keep changing, mutating. It's a matter of time before the H5N1 or any other influenza virus strain which is circulating in birds or animals will pick up a mutation which will allow it to spread from human to human. Once it gets that ability, then it becomes a transmissible airborne virus like COVID was. And the last time there was an influenza pandemic, in 2009, we were very lucky. That particular strain of H1N1 was very mild. And even though WHO had declared a pandemic at that time, it did not turn into anything very major and kind of died down in a matter of time, which is a very good thing because at that time we neither had good vaccines nor good drugs. And certainly in 2020 when COVID started, I think science and technology had advanced so much in the last 10 to 15 years that the vaccine development started almost immediately after the genome sequence of I still remember those early days in January when we were still getting some information from Wuhan but not full information, and there was a lot of secrecy at that time. Even WHO could not really access a lot of data, but luckily a few Chinese scientists decided that they would publish the genome sequence of the viruses which they had sequenced, because the government may have not been very supportive of that, but because those scientists, and they paid a price also later, they were actually barred from their research and stuff. So on the January 10th itself, we knew it's a new type of coronavirus. So that itself shows the speed at which today we are able to find out these things, and we have that capacity to do the genomic sequencing everywhere, and even countries which did not have. So that became our next big problem. So in 4 days after that, we actually had a protocol to do the PCR tests, and so that protocol was published on the 14th so that countries could start testing for it. But the problem was on the whole continent of Africa, there were like 2 labs that could do this testing, particularly with the BSL-3 type of high security lab facilities. And so our challenge was, how is Africa going to test? And so we had to really speed up the development of labs, build their capacity, do the training, get the reagents and things like that. And then of course supply chains also started getting impacted. and countries started hoarding the supplies for themselves. And so those countries which were dependent on imports, whether they were masks, whether it was oxygen, whether it was later on the vaccines, they suffered the most because they were at the back of the queue, and it took a long time for these things to get to them. So there was a lot of unnecessary loss of life. Africa escaped lightly, I would say, because of its age. The median age in Africa is 18. The median age in India today is about 29 or so. But in Western Europe and the US it is, and North America it's about 40, 42. And so we know that this particular virus, SARS-CoV-2, actually impacted older people much worse. And therefore when most of the deaths occurred amongst elderly, though not, of course, many young people also were impacted. And so this is why I think in Africa, even though they had as much infection as anywhere else, the overall death may have been lower. But the other big factor is the data, because the developed world keeps much better data on many aspects of health, including births and deaths. And in India today, we still really don't have a complete death reporting, because a lot of people die at home in the rural areas, and unless there is a need for the family for some property or other reason, they may not even go and get the death registered. And moreover, the cause of death is not certified by a medical person. So this is a very big gap we have, because we are not able to really analyze the burden of disease in our country. In developed countries, from the causes of death itself, you know the burden of disease. The policy makers can immediately tell, and they can analyze the trends and they can take corrective action. But here we have to do studies like surveys and verbal autopsy studies and things to find out, and those are very cumbersome. So there's a big gap in our data. The other big gap in our data systems is that we all operate in silos, and so we are not able to bring data sets together. So now, after this pandemic and everything happened, there's a One Health mission that the government of India has launched. So the One Health mission basically recognizes the fact that human, animals and environment are linked. That human beings, we are not the sole occupants of this planet, but there's only one planet and we all have to survive together. And whether it's infectious diseases, whether it's pollution, loss of biodiversity, it impacts us in many ways. So the One Health mission is trying to get that holistic approach. But one of the things they're strengthening is the intersectoral sharing of data. So that data which the animals, veterinary sector, livestock sector, fisheries sector, they all collect data. Similarly, there is environmental surveillance data, and there is of course the health data which sits with the health ministry. If only you bring these, there are surveillance labs all over the country which are constantly doing this type of surveillance for a large number of viruses and bacteria. So unless we bring those together, we will not be able to correlate and find out some infection in humans is coming from some particular animal infection. And we still have a lot of zoonotic diseases like anthrax. Once in a while you'll read in the paper. Of course, leptospirosis, rabies is still there. So these are all zoonotic infections, and the only way to address them is a joint effort where the interventions, very often to save human beings, you have to do the intervention in animals. So you may have to do animal vaccination in order to protect humans from a particular disease. So that area is also a little bit neglected. Whereas if you go to Scandinavia and things like that, you'll find even the fish have a vaccination. They have a massive vaccination program in their fish farming. So I think the whether it's climate change or whether it is pandemics, the other big threats I could just list are antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. I think Kerala is doing quite well in terms of having a good policy to address particularly the over-the-counter sale of antibiotics. And during pandemic, everybody was taking antibiotics left, right, and center. And I should say that doctors also were prescribing unnecessarily antibiotics and all sorts of drugs, because none of those medicines were working for COVID, but still they were being prescribed. And it was that has resulted in an increase in antimicrobial resistance. So the prediction is by 2050 you'll run out of antibiotics, because the bugs would have developed resistance, and simple infections which you can treat today, you won't be able to treat, and then you go back to the pre-antibiotic era when survival depended on chance. You don't have antibiotics. So that is a kind of a worst case scenario, but there's a very real chance that many antibiotics today don't work against common infections. So that is another big threat. And then we could take other challenges also, like R&D, developing new products. We saw during COVID that even if one country was producing a vaccine, you needed the equipments and reagents and materials and components of that vaccine coming from multiple different countries. And at one point of time, these supply chains had got stopped. So I remember having frantic phone calls from some of the Indian companies that were manufacturing vaccines saying they were not able to get certain components that had to come from the US because of the stoppage of all export. They invoked their own emergency act, and so that allows them to stop exporting products which they think they need for domestic. So many countries were doing that naturally. So this became a real challenge, and therefore the point I'm trying to make is that none of these threats could be addressed without some kind of global collaboration and cooperation. Within a large country like India, of course, within India itself, we need a lot more better coordination, regulation, policy, implementation. But when it comes to things like travel and trade, for example, countries had agreed through the international health regulations that what kind of travel and trade restrictions should be imposed, in what conditions would you impose them, because it causes a huge economic impact and a damage. As we know, saw the tourism industry collapse. So many industries actually suffered during the pandemic. So unless there is a reason to impose those, you should not. But yet, what we saw was that the high-income countries were continuously imposing these kind of travel bans on people, even though it made no sense. WHO, we kept saying that scientifically it is not going to give you any benefit. When the Omicron variant was described in South Africa, immediately US, Europe, UK all put a travel ban on 4 South African countries. And this resulted in a huge economic loss, to them. And there was no point, because that Omicron variant was already around the world. The virus is not waiting for people to wake up and then put travel bans and all that. Virus is already gone. So this is, so the president of South Africa at that time made a statement saying, how can you expect any country to be open about a new variant or a new virus or a new outbreak if this is the response that you're going to get? So on the one hand, you want everyone to be transparent about data. On the other hand, you act unilaterally and that damages our economy. So there was a big divide also, I think, between the high income and the low and middle income countries. And in fact, India was actually trying to take action to support the low and middle income countries. Like India and South Africa went to the World Trade Organization very early in the pandemic and said there should be, the intellectual property regime, the TRIPS agreement should be immediately operationalized to exclude all COVID products, whether they're drugs or diagnostics, from that intellectual property protection, because it's a global emergency. And so the technology, the know-how, the IP should be made available to any company that might want to use it. So if that had actually happened in 2020, things would have been better, definitely better, because there were many companies in India and many other countries, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Latin America, that could have started manufacturing products if they had received the technology and the know-how at the same time as the big companies were doing it. But they wanted to monopolize it. And so the WTO appeal that was filed by India in 2020 was finally discussed by them in 2022, by which time it was too late. And in 2022 they said, okay, some very watered down kind of provision was made. So the geopolitics today is definitely going to be a challenge when we are trying to address health issues. For India, we are, I think, in a much better position because we are quite advanced in terms of technology, in terms of infrastructure, resources, scientists, R&D and so on, but we are not completely, it's not that we can do without any kind of international support. We still import a lot of goods, especially heavy machinery, big items, and some very sophisticated reagents and things which are needed for producing health products. And we have been good at generic products. So we have been very good, our industry has been very good at creating affordable copies of an original product. We need to do much more in original R&D. And I think the pandemic did push our companies to do that. So you saw a lot of diagnostics coming, right? From the days when we only could do PCR, now we can do a point of care test. Within a few minutes, you know whether you have infection. Of course, that was all done for COVID, but we can do it for other infections as well, and that is happening now, the diagnostics. Similarly, for vaccines, I think many of our companies really took up the challenge and came into new areas like RNA, mRNA was a very new platform. I don't think any Indian company had been working on mRNA before, but now I know that there are several programs going on to develop mRNA-based vaccines, and similarly, one of the companies, Cadila, had come up with a DNA vaccine, which was the only one in the world, actually. So it was not that highly effective, so it was never used widely, but the fact is that that innovation, that R&D happened in an Indian pharmaceutical company laboratory. So I think there is a lot more scope for that kind of innovation to happen, but we have to be very careful that if something happens again, could be any viral, could be Mpox, today, okay, Mpox is mainly circulating in Africa, but it could suddenly mutate and change, and that's what happens, and then suddenly you find there's an outbreak. So we need not only good surveillance, good sharing of data, and we also need this R&D to be able to respond very quickly, to be able to create the products, and that can only happen if you have already prepared in advance. It cannot happen if you wait till the emergency comes and then you start developing. So the new vaccines got developed in record time during COVID because of the previous investment by the US to a large extent, by the NIH, which has an annual budget of $45 billion going into research. And because of that, many labs around the world were in a position to actually quickly start the vaccine development. But that was built on years of investing. So I think investing in science and R&D definitely pays off for any country and of course globally, and strengthening institutions. And then final part of that is strengthening the risk communication. So we were talking earlier about big media outcry which happened a couple of weeks ago on this HMPV virus. The HMPV virus is a known virus. It's a respiratory virus. It's been infecting people, especially children. It causes only a common cold type of thing. And yet the media made it out to be a new virus that has come from China. And then they were showing all these images of Chinese hospitals full of patients. So they just put random things together and managed to create a panic. And I was surprised at how much actually that people got worried with this, because any mention of China virus, then people start thinking, I think back to the days of COVID. So I think some responsibility is also needed as far as the media is concerned, but also the public health communication, which needs to be also very clear, transparent, and timely. You shouldn't wait for panic to start before communicating. And viral epidemics are not the only things. We have to be health communication on so many aspects of life. So that, I think, again, we need to strengthen that, particularly with the risk of misinformation and disinformation. And today with AI, you don't know what to believe. You see so many things on social media, and half of them are not right. So it's very hard to make out and sift through all that information and say, okay, this seems to be credible, or this is proper information, I should follow it, and this is not correct or it's misleading. So it is hard, even, so I think we have to also start training people to not take everything that they see and read for granted, but really to question it. Is it plausible? Is it rational? Is it scientifically? So that is like general science literacy, I would say, or health literacy, where people understand the basics of how diseases are caused and spread, and don't start believing. I remember the craziest messaging that was going during the pandemic is that Bill Gates essentially has done this whole thing. Now he's developing vaccines and he's putting his chips into those vaccines, and then now everybody's going to have a chip, and then Bill Gates will control everybody. So this kind of videos were circulating. I think people were actually getting scared by seeing that. I had a lot of people actually used to reach out to me and really keep on asking, are these vaccines safe? Are these vaccines safe? So at WHO, we started doing lot more communication, because we realized people wanted information. They wanted truthful, credible information. So we started Science in 5, one small video, Science in 5-minute video every week on some topic. And we choose the topic based on what we could see the people are really discussing, and they're asking a lot of questions. So there are many ways in which we can do that, and we have to start from school children, I think. We have to start from school children and really make them aware of the world and environment that they live in. We don't have to scare people. If you start talking about climate change, it can become very depressing and scary. But we also need to look at what are the opportunities, what are the things we should be thinking about, as you also pointed out. You're faced with difficult choices now, very difficult choices. And so we've got to make those choices based on, I think, looking at the future generation. So there's a famous saying, right? You inherit the earth and you are a trustee of the earth for the next generation. It's not that we have to finish off this earth and leave it in such a bad condition for our children and grandchildren. So I digressed a little bit, but I thought it might be useful to set the background in terms of what we are now trying to do at the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. As you know, it was set up by my father in 1988. Where do I have to point this? You'll be able to move it, or should I move it this way? From there? So the foundation was set up in 1988 by my father when he came back from the Philippines, from the International Rice Research Institute, having been the DG there, and he had just won the first World Food Prize. So yes, you can go to the next slide. It's working? Thank you. So the vision really was to link science with society for equitable and sustainable development, because my father believed that you have scientific and technological solutions, but very often it's not reaching the community, and similarly the community's concerns, but their own traditional wisdom could be very often used, and that doesn't reach the policy maker. So it's really a two-way. So our communities that we work with are mainly, of course, smallholder farmers, fishermen and women, and tribals. And our purpose is empowering the communities themselves so that they can have a more sustainable and a better livelihood as well as a life. And our role is like to play a catalyst for change. So we are not an NGO that will go and undertake some development activities in a particular area, but really it is to transform the way that those communities understand and respond to their own areas where they live. So be able to understand their own natural resources and how to sustainably manage them, and where can technology really play a role to take them to the next level. So apart from our office in Chennai, we have several regional offices, regional centers, and we also have, of course, several smaller teams in different states. So we work across 14 or so states. But our major regional centers are in Wayanad in Kalpata, where we have a community agrobiodiversity center. I'll say more about that. In Jaipur, in Orissa, that is in Koraput district, we have also a tribal agrobiodiversity center, and Jaipur is also considered to be one of the origins of rice in the world. And so it was recognized as a geographically important agricultural heritage site. Yesterday I was in Mangambu, where the Kuttanad Kayal cultivation has also been recognized by the FAO as a globally important agricultural heritage site. And the third one in India is in Kashmir, saffron farming. So we have 3 agricultural heritage sites recognized globally, and one of them is Kuttanad. And then we have a center in Pumpuhar in Nagapattinam district of Tamil Nadu. This was set up actually after the tsunami, where the foundation really wanted to do something more long term for the coastal communities. Everybody was doing immediate rehabilitation, which was very much needed, of course, after the terrible devastation of the tsunami. But we also needed, my father had recognized very long ago in the 1970s itself, that climate change was going to pose a very major threat to our farmers, our agriculture, as well as our fishing and coastal communities. So coastal area research has been a major thrust for us, for a long time. So the 3 foundational pillars that we try to address are food security or food and nutrition security, economic security, and ecological security. With all of these 3, obviously many of the SDGs, actually you can see, if you add up these 3, several of the SDGs are covered. Then we have program areas, like we have food security, agriculture, nutrition and health. We have sustainable livelihoods. We have biodiversity management and climate resilience. And then cross-cutting things like gender and technology and so on. Our operating model is usually to develop research with participation of the community. So it's a very participatory way of doing things. The first thing is we engage with the communities and we try and find out what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, challenges that they are facing. And then we try to find a solution, we pilot that, develop a model that works, and then try to scale that model. Now scaling usually has to be done by government. You can scale to some extent with partnership with other organizations. But usually it means that you have to also link with the policy makers. Now if you look at the Western Ghats, it is one of the biodiversity hotspots in the world. And why is it a hotspot? Because it's one of 17 biodiversity hotspots. It's also heavily populated, as the whole of Kerala is. And therefore, when you have this rich biodiversity and you have this very high population density, it's a threat to the survival of biodiversity. It's also a threat to the human beings. And in the past 50 years, we've seen that mainly due to human activities like urbanization and clearing the forest for agriculture and for other purposes, and of course climate change, both these have contributed to habitat loss, ecosystem degradation. And you can see the red areas, the southern Western Ghats, are more badly affected. So that's the part actually that falls in Kerala. It's also one of the most rich, areas in terms of diversity and threatened species, and that is why I think this southern Western Ghats is an area where we need to do more in terms of conservation. So again, we talk about the 4C approach, because my father always said that you cannot do conservation without the people benefiting from it. So if you just, like we do, reserve forests, you just cordon off the forest, you don't allow people to go, and the people actually end up being the losers. Whether it's a tiger reserve or any other kind of reserve forest, it's the tribals who live there who ultimately have paid the price for, of course, preserving the tiger and the other species. But then we've forgotten about the human beings in the process. So it's a 4C approach, which is cultivation, conservation, consumption, and commerce. And if you can have a model which can conserve, but at the same time you promote cultivation of some of the species, which can then be used both for consumption and for commerce, then that makes a lot of sense to local communities. This applies to different habitats and landscapes, not only to the forest or the Western Ghats. The same thing applies also in the coastal system, and we work with fishing communities and mangrove ecosystem, for example. This very much applies there. So this property, about 40 acres in Calcutta, was family property that was donated to the foundation by my father, and it's a very beautiful place and at the foot of a mountain which is a reserve forest, and there's a botanical garden there that was established way back in 1997, and we are one of the members of the Botanical Garden Society of International, Conservation International. And mainly the goal was to serve as a center of excellence for the conservation of threatened and endemic plant species of the Western Ghats, and also to provide knowledge and also to help with the restoration, both ex situ and in situ conservation. So you can see that large numbers of species, and the red listed species, the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, actually has this classification of rare, threatened, very vulnerable, and so on. So in that classification you have red, and so we have 300 or so red species, in which there are trees, shrubs, herbs, climbers, and so on. And you can see that we've been working there now for over 25 years, so we've documented a lot of the endemic species over there. Even new plants and new insects also have been discovered, and we have been running a nursery, distributing a lot of the seedlings, both for medicinal plants as well as for the threatened species, and also welcoming visitors, college students, school students, and other visitors, and taking them around, showing them. The model, obviously there is no point doing it just on those 40 acres, so we've used a hub and spokes model where we worked with schools, colleges, institutions. Sacred Groves has been another good program where traditionally Kerala, of course, was very famous for its sacred groves, but many of them went off because of, again, urbanization. So just restoring those sacred groves, which are there always of local species, the local people have a spiritual connect to them, and it brings the community together essentially. Then we have worked forest department and done reforestation on forest land, but also coffee farms. So more and more now the coffee plantations are also turning into places where you can have more of agro-biodiversity, and something like called shade coffee is now becoming more popular. So the different approaches that have been used, and recently we went back and did an assessment of how many of these spokes that we had started 15-20 years ago, and we found 85% of them actually have done well in terms of whatever was planted has survived and grown and is thriving. So a lot of threatened and endemic plant species have been conserved, not just the wild, but also what we call neglected and underutilized species. That means that there is a lot of potential for crops and wild relatives of crops to actually contribute to our food system. As you know, today, one of the biggest challenges we have is unhealthy diet. And that unhealthy diet is because of a number of reasons, but partly behavioral. A lot of fast food, junk food, and so on, processed food now has come into our diet. But we've also forgotten a lot of the traditional vegetables, fruits, and particularly the tribals. They had a complete knowledge of the forest, what you could eat, which are the leafy vegetables, the mushrooms, the herbs. They know about the medicinal properties. So what now, if you look at the bottom of that slide, it's all like this tubers, yam. So many varieties I've seen when I go to Wayanad. It's just incredible, the number of varieties there. And each of them probably has little different nutritional properties, or some of them may even have other kind of properties. Then of course you have spices, you have fruits, and so on. So our goal is not only to look at big, species of trees and so on, but to also do much more work on these, what we call it's called globally NUS, neglected underutilized species, but we could also call them species with more potential to actually provide the nutrition which today we are lacking, and it could also provide business opportunities and entrepreneurship for the local people. So, over the years it's been worked with a number of other associations, and now what we want to do is develop this whole area into a biodiversity park. So it was a small botanical garden. The rest of it was research going on there with the communities. But now the biodiversity park concept is really about expanding it and creating spaces where people can come, visitors can come and really learn about local ecology, interact with the tribals who have that knowledge, learn about the local geology also, the rocks, the soil and so on, understand how you can do sustainable agriculture maybe in that kind of ecosystem, and be able to do bird watching and maybe workshops and things like that, have a visitor center and provide opportunities for the tribals there. And mainly the Panya tribals are the ones who are very, very backward in Wayanad district. So I had been going and meeting all these people in the villages, and I felt very strongly that the young people there need more opportunities, because they're all very bright young people. But I didn't see any hope in their eyes, So I was interacting with some of these young girls, and they were saying, please can you get us out of this rut, because our future looks bleak. We're not able to finish class 12, because during COVID they lost a lot of time. They have long distances they have to go, sometimes they don't have transport. And so many of these kids actually end up dropping out of school, even though they are quite bright, very bright. Or they keep failing in one language or one subject, they can't clear. Some of them clear, some of them don't clear. The boys tend to drop out earlier than girls, and the typical trajectory is the boys go off to do labor like their fathers. And very often the mothers also are doing, the daily wage laborers. But these kids don't want to do that. So we thought, okay, let's offer them something different, which is eco-skilling. So we said, have you ever heard of something like this? Would you like to come and try it? And they said, it sounds very interesting. Nobody's ever talked to us about this type of opportunity. So, in fact, you see some girls there, they come from one particular hamlet which I had visited late in one evening, no electricity, no nothing, dark place. And I met 4 young girls there, all of them had finished 10th, 11th. And 6 months later, I heard one of them had died of tuberculosis. So I really felt very bad that this young girl at 17, why did she have to die of TB? It's a combination of poverty, undernutrition, and lack of access, lack of knowledge. The TB is a completely treatable disease, so that really affected me a lot. And so I thought, okay, so these first 12 Panya youth are now in our center, and we just started their training program about 3 months ago. So we've tied up with a number of other partners so that they can get a good rounded training on different aspects of how to maintain a nursery, how to recognize plants of different types, birds, butterflies, all of that. So they spend 15 days in Auroville, where there's a very nice botanical garden, where the botany course actually is run over there. So they took a shorter version. Then the Gurukula Sanctuary, also in Wayanad, they will be spending time there, in the Malabar Botanical Garden. And we're trying to get this whole course certified with the university in Bangalore, the TDU, so that they'll also have a certificate at the end of it, because it's something new. So we thought that this is what is needed. We need more youngsters who've got, and I thought many of them will drop out after the first few days. They'll say it's very boring and we don't like this, because the tendency there is to go and hang out. The boys will be hanging out and they won't be doing things like this. But not one of them has dropped out. And in fact, when I met them, they were asking me to give them things like uniform, backpack, shoes, binoculars. They said they're very, very enthusiastic. So they will finish in another 3 months, and we hope that we can absorb, if not all, at least some of them into our garden. But we want to train at least 40 of these youth every year, because there are many places where they could then get absorbed. We work in resorts, in nurseries, in gardens that are coming up. They could be of great help also to the forest department. And I hope that we can also create some business opportunities, entrepreneurship opportunities. But for that we will need some kind of support. Maybe some of you would be very good at that. Like I said, there are plenty of things that can be done there. Avocado grows there. You could have avocado powder, mushroom powder, a lot of green leafy vegetables that could be. So we could create actually there itself some small businesses where value-added products can be made and sold, which would bring them a good income, some dignity, and it would be very useful for society, obviously, because these are all products which would be very, very useful. They could really show a different model of how we don't do charity for tribals, but we really try to empower them into their own. So this is, I mentioned Auroville, Gurukula and Malabar Botanical Gardens, and they've been having a good time, and obviously they interact with our scientists, and we're also trying to improve their spoken English by interacting with them. So my request is really that we are looking for collaboration with partners on this initiatives. One is to create that beautiful biodiversity park there, which will be a beautiful place for people to visit, but there will be a lot of science and research going on as well, because as I mentioned, we are in a hotspot area. One Health, in fact, will be a very important component there, because we have a lot of wildlife, animal-human conflict happening, and Forest Department, in fact, has asked us for solutions because all the time elephants and boars and peacocks and others are coming in. Then we have this green skilling program, and the third one is the Climate, Biodiversity and Health Center, which I want to set up in order to address these interconnected issues. So the second part of my talk is going to be more on climate change, and we need to really think about this as the triple threats, not just climate change, we hear about that a lot, but the other two, which is biodiversity loss, which I just demonstrated, Western Ghats as a good example. The rate of species extinction, historically is about 1 to 5 species a year. If you really go back about 200-300 years, that's the rate at which species do get extinct. Now we have increased that rate by 1,000 times. So the speed at which we are losing species today is unimaginable. And with global warming, it is estimated that more and more species will become extinct, particularly the mammals, but also insects, of course corals, a lot of marine animals as well. Now on the pollution side, again, we have a huge problem, because Mr. Punduran was talking about air pollution. Yes, we're much better off in the south than we are in the north. But if you really look at the AQI in your place where you're living, there are very few places in India where you're breathing air which meets the WHO quality standards. So the WHO standards are 5 micrograms per cubic millimeter of PM 2.5. You can look at the newspaper, the Hindu carries every day the cities which are reporting on their PM 2.5, PM 10. They're not one. They're all in the hundreds. Sometimes, places which are coastal will be lower, 40, 50, but it's way above 5. And what the science tells us now is that anything you're breathing PM 2.5 above that level of 5 or 10 is harming us. And could be the reason why we're seeing so much diabetes going up in India, so much of neurological illnesses, dementia, etc. Cardiovascular diseases all affecting young people. Of course, if you live in the Delhi region, then you're just breathing, literally breathing poison, and cancer as well is going up, because these particles get into our blood. They set up these inflammatory pathways, inflammatory system, and inflammation is very bad for our health. And I think Kotakal would agree. I think your whole approach, the Ayurvedic approach, is really to reduce the levels of inflammation, of course done through traditional medicine, but we can also explain it using modern science. So climate change and biodiversity are not something which is very arbitrary or abstract, but it impacts our health, and it impacts our health in many ways. I can't use the slide now, it's small, but if you start from the bottom of the slide and look at the ecological, what we call the ecological determinants of health, whether this is extreme events, it is the heat, flooding, and so on. Those are the natural calamities which occur. Then we've got to put it in the context of the social and structural determinants. Where do you live? What kind of house do you have? Do you have cooling or warming in your house? Do you have access to clean water, sanitation? So all those things become your social determinants of health, and environmental and structural determinants. Then the next level is the health system. What kind of health system do we have? Can you get to a healthcare facility close to your home? Do you have a qualified nurse or doctor there? Do they have the supplies? For example, heat. Now, it's going to be a very major problem all over India, including Kerala. Are health centers really equipped to deal with a lot of people coming in with heat exhaustion? Because if you don't treat right away, those people can die of heat stroke. And I think we saw a lot of deaths last year due to heat stroke. But again, it's underreported. And then finally, you see on top the impact on health, which is heat-related illness, increasing vector-borne diseases. Dengue has become a huge problem, in all our cities. Malnutrition also resulting because your crops are affected. Many places now suffer from recurrent drought. And then the pollution, which affects your lungs and so on. And mental health. Mental health is again neglected. We don't talk about it. We don't also have a lot of data, but it is very clear that globally during pandemic, in fact, more data came because pandemic also affected the mental health of people very badly. That I think everybody could recognize, but how climate change is impacting the mental health. So we actually, I'll show you some data also from the study that we did. So the Minister of Women and Child Development asked us to do a study looking specifically at women and children. And she said, we don't have data in India. Can you look at this? So we brought out this report middle of last year, which basically was a collection of data from all over India. We went to different places, we had workshops, we got inputs from NGOs and others. And we found that women definitely have a disproportionate impact. For example, pregnant women are much more impacted by heat. And so they can, either have premature deliveries or even have a stillbirth if they're, like for example, agricultural laborers who are working in the fields and can have to continue working through the heat. They have this kind of issue. Newborns, of course, if you keep them in a very hot place, they cannot because their temperature regulation is not good. So in 2010 in Ahmedabad, there was a very big, the first, I think, major heat wave that was really recorded as having caused about 1,300 additional deaths during those few weeks of heat wave. So Ahmedabad government then really got very proactively addressed this issue. One of the things they found is if you have the maternity ward on the top floor with the babies, then that tends to get hotter if it's not air conditioned. And babies there were dying more. So the moment they moved the maternity ward, they did, the white paint on the roofs. They also took efforts to warn the public. So they had green, orange and red type of warning that would go out with the clear instructions what all you're supposed to do. Industries were all told, so there were certain labor codes that were brought in. A lot of drinking water outlets were provided. So even simple things like that can actually help. And I think industries will really have to think about this because productivity loss is going to be one of the things which happens as the temperatures go up. And so you really have to think about the workspace where people are going to work because beyond certain temperatures, it is very difficult for people to work and be productive. We also saw a relationship between natural disasters and gender-based violence or domestic violence. So a lot of women reported having faced more domestic violence during either prolonged drought, heat waves, or sometimes even after floods when they are actually have to move away from their home, they are displaced. So girls, we saw that there was an increased incidence of younger age at marriage. So if there's distress in the family, the first thing to do is get the girl married. Earlier pregnancies, less of antenatal and postnatal care. Children's education gets impacted. Obviously, every time there's a climate disaster, the schools close. Whether it's flooding, whether it's heat, or in the north now for pollution, schools were closed because GRAP 4 was imposed on Delhi several times this last winter. But there is a lot of scope for innovation, a scope for addressing all these things, and we need more research, more data integrated. So the report provides not just these findings, but a number of recommendations for policymakers. So based on that, we've been asked to do some more work now. So you can see that on this side, the left hand is a map of India which shows that 75% of Indian districts are extreme hydromet event hots. Hydromet events are floods, droughts and cyclones. And of course, being coastal state, very much prone to this. But also the hilly areas are prone to landslides, which are much more difficult to predict. 17 out of 20 people in India are vulnerable to these extreme hydromet disasters. Now, this does not include heat. So if you include heat, that entire central belt will also become red. The middle one is looking at the most vulnerable states for heat, according to the Ministry of Environment, are Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh. You can see the dark brown, dark red districts. But again, large parts of India are also orange and so prone to heat. Now, what is less well recognized is the fact that humidity plays a very major role. So I live in Chennai. Here in Cochin also I can feel that the humidity is extremely high. So even if the temperature may be 31, when you add that humidity, what you experience is more like 36. So when the temperature goes to 35, what you experience is like 40. So there's something called the wet bulb temperature, beyond which, a certain cutoff beyond which the human body cannot actually cope. Your cardiovascular system, everything starts shutting down. That wet bulb temperature is around 31 degrees, because your body won't evaporate because of the humidity, and if you don't evaporate sweat, you can't cool your body down. So you reach a point where your body cannot cool itself down using its own physiological mechanisms. Unfortunately, we may get there. Now, some parts of India will get there in the next, I don't know, maybe 30 to 50 years. People will have to move away, So that's called climate migrants, when you won't be able to live certain places. And the last map on the right is the air pollution that we were talking about. Now, the green doesn't mean that green is great, as I said, but it's more based on the national air quality standards. So India's air quality standards are about 8 times higher than the WHO standards. And even based on that, you can see that a large part of the country is red. So I think I told you about these data. This is just to show statistical significance and things like that. So one of the things that I want to do now is to set up the Center for Climate Resilience, Environment and Health, which will work towards solutions, evidence-based solutions, to build community resilience. Because if you live, and I'm talking here mainly about low-income communities which don't have some of the facilities which we have. We can turn on air conditioning, we have housing which protects us. So looking at key focus areas will be heat. So we're already starting some big programs on heat. We are partnering with others like Indian Institute of Science and Art Park, which is a group set up to do AI and robotics within the Indian Institute of Science. So looking at how artificial intelligence can be used to make much earlier prediction and early warning systems. So the meteorological department is also very keen. And globally, the UN Secretary General actually has put out a call saying that every human being must have access to early warning by 2027. So I think AI will play a big role there. Malnutrition, of course, because we work on food and nutrition security. Climate resilient agriculture, whether it is saline agriculture, this bocali cultivation here, whether it is different forms of agriculture we use in our country. We have to adapt to the changing climate, because heat impacts plants as much as human beings. So the yields start going down. And in 2022, I remember there was a lot of fear because the wheat output, for the first time after many, many years, the wheat output was lower in 22, which was because of the early heat wave across North India in February, March, which is when the wheat is supposed to ripen. So it ripened early, the yield was low, and there was a lot of worry in the government. In fact, they stopped exports of wheat at that time. So it can be a real threat. Of course, again, there are varieties which are more resilient to heat, to drought, to saline, but also varieties which are more nutritious, which have more vitamins in them and so on. So we need to really propagate those among the farmers. Then infectious diseases, of course, I talked about vector-borne diseases, but also these viral infections, fungus infections and so on. And then hopefully create a hub for climate and health data so that we can start also training the healthcare system, nurses, Anganwadi workers, Ashas, and doctors, of course, on how to manage some of these things. So there will be the research component, there will be the capacity building component, and there will be the policy component, three major components. So on the research, these are just some example of work that we're doing in Orissa, in Koraput district. I told you we have a center there, and we're looking at primary healthcare, how to strengthen primary healthcare, again in these very remote locations where health literacy is very poor, water sanitation very poor. So how do we get the community to really start demanding on these better health services? On capacity building, we are working on a One Health curriculum, and then I talked about this conservation stewardship program of empowering tribal youth in Wayanad. We could potentially also take it to other parts of India. And then collaboration with others, with NGOs, academics, but very importantly with policymakers, working with ministries, because we want our findings, our work to be translated into solutions, and that solution, if it has to be scaled, has to be from government. So we are looking both at nutrition and at heat. Both of these are with the Ministry of Women and Child Development in Delhi. We've also been working closely with Niti Aayog on a roadmap they're developing for net zero, so they asked us to do the health component of that. And I have now set up a collaborative of NGOs. We meet once a month to discuss different aspects of climate and health. Every NGO has their own strength, but these are all NGOs that work on climate. So we're thinking if we come together as a collaborative, we can be more effective. Skip this one. And just give a few examples of how we've used technology to find solutions. So this is something called the Fisher-Friendly Mobile App. And again, this was after the tsunami when the fishermen really were very scared of going out into the sea. And they said we need something which can help us to predict the weather, the wind, the patterns, the sea, how it is, how rough it is, etc., the wave heights, all of that. So it started with that, and in a partnership with INCOIS, which is the International Center for Ocean Information Services. So they collect a lot of data, just like ISRO collects a lot of data. A lot of data that's available, but not necessarily used for any practical applications. So MSSRF worked with INCOIS and Qualcomm as a technology partner to develop this app. And today I must say it's gone through 54 or so iterations where the community, the fishermen themselves have come up and said, now add this feature, add this feature. So it's in 8 coastal languages used by over 1.2 lakh fishermen now. And you can see the kind of features. So it's not just about weather. It's about potential fishing zones, no fishing zone like turtle. You have to stay away from certain areas during the turtle nesting site. Sea current, sea surface temperature, wave height, cyclone alert, all that. GPS for navigation. Also to mark the maritime boundary so that they don't stray into Bangladeshi or Sri Lankan territory. Then also about government schemes for fisher people, news. So this all come from them. These demands come from them, and then every time the app is updated, we incorporate these, and you can see that come in many languages it is there. We're now trying to see if we can use AI and make this even more friendly in terms of being able to communicate orally by talking to the app. But it works offline also, so when they go out to sea, it works. Then we thought, okay, we're women, we have not done anything, so we have this program now, just about a year old, called Fisher Women Connect. It's an app again for empowering women post-harvest fisheries. You can see even older women there who never used a smartphone or an iPad or a tablet are using that. Their children, grandchildren have actually taught them how to use it. And so they get knowledge on post-harvest. So the women do all the work, right? Once the fish comes to the shore, it's the women. Much harder work they do. So fish business promotion, marketing, online marketing, they are being trained. So many of them are now marketing their fish online. Of course, they also get weather and ocean forecasts and market information. So it required a lot of upskilling of these women and also teaching them some marketing skills, business skills, financial skills, all of that. So this was done with USAID and Reliance Foundation support, and we're hoping now for the next phase of this to expand. About 600 women have benefited, but we need to scale that up. Similarly, in agriculture, we've had a program called Plant Clinic. Same thing, you train the local, some progressive farmer from the region to be able to diagnose common pests and pathogens. So the other farmers can bring the plant, a sample, she will examine it under the magnifying glass and be able to identify the disease. And then we also able to, we have a farmers helpline service, etc. The audio and video conferences. Today you can do a lot more through digital technology. So again, this helps in reducing the unnecessary use of pesticides, and because otherwise farmers just apply everything, a combination of everything, because they don't know exactly what they're treating. This one tells very specifically this is a zinc deficiency or this is this fungus, so you just apply that. So similarly, I talked about climate adaptation technology. So many of our field sites, we promote something as simple as crop diversification and intercropping to other, selecting suitable varieties for different climatic zones. So I think I will end my presentation there so that maybe we can have a little bit of time for discussions. But thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, ma'am. Now the floor is open for questions.
Madam, good evening. I'm Hari. I just want to ask you. It's very nice to hear that you are one of the first doctors who have talked about the generic medicine. But many doctors do not recommend that. So why do you say that it's equal to the normal medicine? That's one. That's one question. I have got one more. Let the other come.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are two aspects to that. One is the faith in the medicine. So some of the doctors, they through their own experience, they believe that certain medicines they have been using and they work well. So there it comes to our regulation. How good is our drug regulatory system? Are we really able to make sure that every drug in the market is of good quality? So here I think again we have scope for improvement. We have a good central drug CDSCO, which is the Drug Controller General of India and his office. But then you have state drug regulatory authorities. So quite often these approvals are done at the state level. And different states have different capacities. So I do think that there is a problem that we need to address in terms of the standards, uniform standards that we need to follow. You would have seen last few years also there were some mishaps. Certain products actually resulted in very severe side effects and even death, like cough syrups. So the other side of that is that, the government actually only promotes generic drugs now. I think in the government hospitals, they only write generic drugs. The private sector, of course, you cannot impose. But it's a broader issue also of guidelines. And because in India, the private sector is as big as the government sector. In fact, if you look at outpatient services, more private sector than government. 60-40, something like that. So many people consult a private doctor first, or sometimes not even a doctor. Whoever is available locally could be even an unqualified practitioner. So that's also a problem we have. But I think this mentality of following guidelines is not there still. I think some of the younger doctors probably are trained, especially those who are trained abroad, etc. You have national guidelines, you have a society that makes guidelines for different diseases. You're supposed to follow that. But during COVID, what I saw was completely the opposite. That there was rampant over-prescription, and non-evidence-based medicine was going on. Maybe because everybody was scared and panicking, but at least medical profession should have been more professional about it. Doing CT scan for no rhyme or reason, making people spend a lot of money on things which were not at all necessary. So I think that's why I said we have two sides to it. One side is we need very strong regulatory agencies which will make sure that everything in the market is what is written, If it is paracetamol 500 mg, it should have paracetamol 500 mg. That is not difficult to check. Take action against those companies which are making substandard products. They should be immediately blacklisted. We should not have any compromise over that, because it's medicines we are consuming. We are playing with people's lives. But on the other hand, we need a culture of evidence-based medicine, following guidelines, following, the scientific way of doing medicine. And it should not be everybody's individual experience that is driving it.
Aushadhi itself is, the government.
The Jan Aushadhi, yes. Jan Aushadhi stores good, because they have good quality generic medicines and at much cheaper rates, right, than in the market. Yes. Probably we need a lot more of those.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you for speaking with us tonight. My question is regarding your community-led initiatives, specifically in terms of any cultivation programs that you've had. How do you, as an outsider, establish trust with these local communities? How do you go about establishing that trust, and how do you end up collaborating with them?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think, so this is why we are based in certain places and we have a team there, and that team lives there and works there, and we try to hire people also from the local communities, so that you can build that trust. And as I said, it takes time, so that's why this kind of work takes time. It cannot happen overnight. It's not like you just go and do a survey and you come out. To bring about a transformational change, you have to be present. And so wherever we have seen a lot of success with our models, it's because we have been there, working with the community, hand-holding them, literally sitting with them in the evenings when they have their meetings. So you have to become part of that community, then only they start actually trusting you. And then when they start seeing results, of course, then they become much more enthusiastic and they want to work with you.
Yeah, Dr. Swaminathan, I am happy that you are carrying on the grand tradition of your dad. He was here in 1986 when I was secretary of the KMA. Actually, I think he came here thrice to the KMA. And I also had access to him because I was chief sales manager of FACT, and he was advising us on so many things, including fertilizer blocks, how to develop it. And if I remember right, he actually sent one of his aides, his name was Dr. Gopalakrishnan, rice research expert. He joined FACT, he spent 5 years with us. So there's a close connection between FACT and us. And I'm glad that you're carrying on the grand old tradition. Thank you.
Slightly off the subject you spoke about, madam. You did make a brief mention about Trump pulling out of WHO, and I saw one of your statements where you had mentioned that how it's going to affect the US more than others, where you said about data sharing and so on. How will it affect the rest of the country, particularly countries like India? The functioning of the WHO with this, probably US must be the one which must be the biggest funds must be coming from US. So how does all this affect us? Thank you.
So, one very immediate one is the funding for WHO, because about 20% of funding comes from the US. So they will have big challenge now, paying salaries and things like that. So other countries may step in, but it will be very difficult, I think, to make up that deficit over a long period of time. Secondly, the expertise that the US provides, their institutions, organizations, a lot of the committees of WHO have a lot of US experts. So I don't know whether they'll still be allowed to participate in those kind of bodies which make the guidelines and make the standards and so on. And then the third one, why I said the US will suffer is they will be out of this global network. So the WHO is the only forum where many of the global issues can be discussed, whether it is a pandemic or whether it is other threats, tobacco, there are so many agenda items which get discussed, and then through discussion between countries, some resolutions are adopted. So the pandemic treaty has been now under negotiation for a couple of years. They have not agreed, but the US pulls out, then it will be very hard, because what will happen next time if there is some viral outbreak somewhere? If the US is not part of that global network, they will not come to know of it till it is too late. Or something starts in the US, the rest of the world is not going to come to know about it. So, like I said in the beginning, it's so many things are interconnected. I think it will be impossible. Frankly speaking, I doubt whether this can actually materialize and sustain. I think they will see that it is just not possible. Especially since the US is such a large country, it's also a very powerful country, economically also still. So the financing of WHO, I think, is a small part of it. That immediate pain will be there. It could be overcome in many ways. But it's the larger issues, I think, which I don't know how we will be able to overcome. We have a lot of bilateral with the US as well in terms of science and health. That so far is not being touched, but I do know that he has he's going to make changes with the NIH and the CDC. So NIH is the biggest funder of health research in the world, $45 billion. No other agency comes anywhere close to that. They fund research all over the world. So if he reduces that, or if he stops international work from the NIH, the CDC, that will also have a very big impact. Countries like India, we spend not even 1% of that amount on health research. So I think that maybe one immediate takeaway is that we've got to increase our investment in science and research.
Thank you, ma'am, for your presentation. One thing I could notice that you're talking about top-down approach. There are a lot of NGOs who are doing bottom-up. They go to a community, but their focus is on skill development and employment of the people and bringing their quality of life. So how would you relate this, or can you join with them and improve the other aspects of the community?
Thank you. So I did mention that the economic security and livelihood security is a very important part of all the work we do. So there is nothing we have done where we have not improved the baseline, whatever the livelihood was or the income was. Otherwise, it's all pointless, the kind of interventions that we do. So, of course, we want to also improve the local ecology. We want to work on better ways of improving nutrition and so on. But the incomes and the livelihoods and the skilling. So, I visited some of those villages in Puducherry and rural Tamil Nadu where the work started about 25-30 years ago. Those women, they say that our lives were completely transformed. We were all at home, we never used to come out, we had no skills, we were dependent on our husbands. It's a foundation's work, the creation of SFGs. Today SFG is very common, but in those days the self-help groups were created, skills were built in things which they didn't know, fish rearing, could be backyard poultry, could be mushrooms, cultivation, many different livelihood trainings were given. And the very unique aspect of our work at that time was using digital technology at a time when there was no mobile phone and no internet. So we used to use satellite. VSAT was used in order to run community village knowledge centers. They were called village knowledge centers. And the community provided the space. 2 women usually from there who were educated up to class 10 or so would be the ones who ran that center. They would be given training in computers, and for the first time, that then got adopted by government and became the common service centers. They call them CSCs or the e-Seva centers. Today, many places have government-run centers. At that time, there was nowhere people could go, so naturally, farmers and others were exploited by middlemen. And the very fact that they could then get information on markets, on rates, on what is happening, on government schemes, that empowered them tremendously. So I think we were always at the cutting edge of technology, but to do that kind of social good, not just, we also with Arvind Eye Hospital in those days had a telehealth program. No one was talking about telehealth at that time. So training the local village boys and girls to operate the machines, and then the Arvind Eye Hospital doctors will be connected and they will be able to make a diagnosis. And so for eye health, that program was done. Again, now it's a national program. Tele-health and telemedicine is very much part of the government health program, and it got a big boost during COVID. Yes.
Ma'am, one question. We hear a lot, kind of a little pessimistic narratives from this environmentalists and other social activists that there is absolutely no hope. We have already missed the bus. All the efforts to rescue the planet and the human race started a little bit late. All the destructive activities are happening at a rapid pace, and the efforts to save the planet and human race is not picking pace. Because of that, to use a metaphor, it is better not to put the earth through intensive care unit, but to move it to palliative care. Do you agree with that narrative? Do we still have hope? Thank you.
No, I think we have. Yeah.
This will be the last question, please. Are there any more questions? Okay, then that will be the last one, please.
No, we have to have hope because there is no other choice. We can't just give up. So the thing is, yes, we've already breached 1.5. The Paris Agreement was done to stop the world from going beyond 1.5. That is not going to be the case. And yes, it is true that the rich countries should be doing much more mitigation, because countries like India, other developing countries still need that space to develop. But for us, I think we really have to look at a pathway where we are balancing that, our carbon footprint and our development. And I think the government has done very well in expanding and really promoting renewable energy in a very big way. I think we are ahead of the targets that was set in terms of solar, so that's really good. But we have so many other things that we need to address. But this is where we can promote more innovation in the green technologies. Because otherwise, if we do short-term things now, it will have consequences later. But one of the things I think we should be doing much more of is really looking at these ecologically very fragile areas and vulnerable areas, whether it's in the coast or in the mountains, and stop this type of development buildings which are being constructed, which are clearly not suitable for that ecology. So if we have to make resorts or make hotels, they have to be done in a way which is much more suitable for that place, and keeping in mind that this flooding and landslides and all these things are going to increase. So I think these city planners and the architects and everybody really needs to apply that climate lens now to everything that is being constructed today. And the other thing is, of course, our buildings also need to protect people from heat. So can we use different materials, can we think of solutions actually where we're actually reducing that. If you see many of the government housing that's being made for the low income, they're not at all going to be protecting people against heat. There's no ventilation, there's no greenery, yeah.
Hi ma'am. Of late, I've been personally hearing a lot of outcries, particularly from the Paniya tribe, the place where you've been in Calcutta. Towards the south, towards the Tamil Nadu, the Paniya tribe and the Kurchia tribe, I've been hearing personally from them a lot of outcries about the alcohol, particularly the young women, and there have been a lot of them coming out with widows at the age of 20, 25, less than that. Is there any initiatives that your foundation has started taking towards them? How they can come out of that, that trouble? Because
That's a very good question. My own feeling is that there are a lot of mental health issues amongst these youngsters, and partly it's because of this. If you go and see where they live and how they live, it is you can then start understanding why they might be getting into those kind of depression, anxiety. If you don't have anything to look forward to, then that itself is something which puts you down very much. Then you, of course, start looking for alcohol, drugs, and other things which are now widely available everywhere. And there's a lot of teenage pregnancy, a lot of this thing is happening. So, you know, other NGOs have also had different approaches. Some of them use sports, some of them use other kinds of activities to keep them. Ultimately, I think they need a pathway where they can see themselves coming out of the situation that they are in. I think the fact that they used to be forest living, you know, communities, living in harmony with nature, their nutrition came from the forest. And today they depend on PDS and, you know, daily labor, and they don't have their natural environment to live in. So that connection is conscious. Alcohol is a very big issue there, and people who are more experienced than me and who have lived and worked in tribal areas say that it's because of the loss of identity and disempowerment that they feel that, you know, they take to alcohol. So it's a very complex issue to address, because what do you do? Anyway, the forests are protected, they are not, you know, going to go and live there again.
Yep.
So we've got to find other ways of.
Because some of them ask me personally, can you take me back to the forest? The elderly ones.
Yeah.
And some of the young women who is a widow, particularly I remember her because I've been with them on the weekends some of the time. She's been asking, can you show me a way to get out of this place? Like when I went more deeper, it was a large crowd of women. 20s, mother of 2. And most of their husbands died of cancer or different disease. And the big trouble, some of the elder ones said to me, is that when we go to the local doctors here, they give us some prescriptions. They ask us to go to Kozhikode or to Coimbatore. And they were asking me, can you guide me? How can I go there? I hardly can get into PES. Is there any support that can you do for us? So is there anything that your foundation doing on that regard so that I can pass the message or I can direct them to your office?
So one is the skilling program, of course, that can't do it for everybody, but certain number. But I think we'll have to talk to the state government. They do have a lot of schemes for tribals in terms of skilling. But many of these are left out. The Paniyas in particular, you know, they are the ones who are not really benefiting that much as the other tribal groups. So I think maybe we will do more to connect them to the government schemes also. And the third thing we're doing is we're starting a program where we're looking at their own health beliefs, because the tribals also feel alienated when they come to government health centers. They sometimes feel they're treated differently, that their concept of health is not matching with what allopathic doctors are telling them, or they don't even understand the terminologies being used. Sickle cell is a good example, you know. So we're trying to do a program there. Last time I was in Wayanad, I actually went and visited the house of a 25-year-old woman who had died of tuberculosis. And I wanted to find out, like, why did this young woman die? It's a treatable disease. She's left behind 2 young children, you know, her mother's looking after her. It's a poor family, they're doing daily labor only. So it's a failure of at several steps. You can't pinpoint any one person for the cause of her death. But it's a failure of the system, of not having identified that she was sick early enough, done all the investigations and treatment. And as you say, she was also sent to Calicut, you know, and in all that process, she deteriorated. So there's no easy answer to, you know, but you have raised an important issue that is present there, and we need to address it. I think collectively, no one organization can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, all of you who have actively participated. I now request our Honorary Secretary, Dr. Anil Joseph, to propose a vote of thanks. Before we get into the formal vote of thanks, I would request our past president, Mr. T.T. Thomas, to kindly come forward, and past ICMR president to kindly come forward and hand over a memento to our chief guest.
Good evening all. Indeed, it was a lot of sections were covered in this particular session. It was an eye-opening session where we learned the background of the COVID formations, the efforts that has been gone into control the pandemic, then came into the tribal area, the development which was happening, and a lot of excellent work done by the foundation. Then moved to how the digital upliftment is happening in the fishermen communities, and so much of enriching data has been shared. Thank you, our Chief Guest Swaminathan, Soumya Swaminathan, for this wonderful lecture. Let's give a big round of applause for her. I would like to thank our Vice President, the Program Committee Chair, ITS Khalid, for bringing in every time very wonderful resource persons that we see a jam-packed hall. I was wondering that if more people come, where we will be able to accommodate. So thank you very much for bringing it out. And as usual, our president is leading us from. Thank you people for all the efforts you've taken and keeping us going forward. Again, I would like to thank all the people who are sitting here, that they are called, and I know we all have been enriched by this session, where we learned quite a lot about the climate change, the impact, and what is going to happen. The questions are very much open. But before we get into talking something about that and closing this, I would like to thank and congratulate Harikumar sir for the wonderful 42nd Kerala Management Convention, which happened in Grand Hyatt on 16/17. Thanks to the entire team who has put in a lot of effort on that. And then here, as we stop here, we are in a situation where America backing out for the Trump story, and again, people who want to control the climate, who made the formation of the Paris Treaty, they are backing out. So what is the future of the world is going to be? Already, like pointed out, the bus has been gone, are we in paralytic or the hope? But if you look in, the world was surviving all this. So hopefully, we all believe in hope, and we hope that it is going to survive. Because without us coming, if you look in, there was the same landscape. Every 100 years, there was a pandemic. Every 100 years, there was a huge landslide. Think the Wayanad, we lost 350 lives. But exactly 100 years back, the same thing has happened. So man is adding to the woes, man is creating problem, and for us responsible people, we should be careful about what is happening. But then, I think the bigger power is much more thing, the world who has created, they will be balanced. And this is a positive message which we want to give, especially to you. Let us not worry, things will work out, everything will move on as it is. So thank you very much for all for joining us. It was a very wonderful session. And next week, we will have another excellent session on the future of mobility in developing countries, challenges and innovation by our own Naveen Philip, CEO, Popular Mega Motors. So it will be another interesting session on 31st. Do join us on that. And I would like to thank, because we have a galaxy of the KMA dignitaries and especially the members also. We have T.T. Thomas sir. Thank you very much sir for joining us. The KMA president as well as our past president. We have Jose Philip sir, K.N. Chatri sir, Dr. Nirmala Lilly, A. Balakrishnan, past presidents. Thank you very much for joining us. And we have an array of MC members. K. Harikumar, A.C.K. Nair, Meena Thomas, Sunit Balakrishnan, Tom P. Joseph, Johnson Matthew, Ruba George, Lega Balajendran, Joy Patel, Bala Gopal, Shaktimani. I think only one or two is absent. Everybody is here. So that is the expectations you have brought in, and we are very delighted that you shared so much of vast knowledge to us. Thank you, madam. Thank you once again. Once again, I thank each and everyone for joining us. And let us, as always I say, let us understand that this is what you learn, but the real thing is that when we apply what we have learned into practice. So each of us do a little bit for the environmental, which can turn into be a huge crisis and can prevent the disasters from happening. So that should be the lesson. So much of positive things has been told, and I wonder how she get all the time. So the way, so much of things, right from Wayanad, US, UK, wherever it is, we were going through the profile, and that said, we had such a wonderful personality because sharing her immense knowledge with us. And thank you, madam, once again. And with that, we end today and see you all next week on 31st for the next session by Naveen Philip. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anil. Before we end the meeting, let's all rise for the national anthem.
पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तब जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे